Thank you, Minda. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us tonight or today, depending on where you're calling in from. I and my team are looking forward to an exciting event with you. And we have some truly incredible divers and on-the-water specialists with us tonight. They all will have some truly fascinating stories to share. But before we dive into the questions and the discussions with these personalities, I obviously want to say thank you for Paddy for actually helping us with setting up such a high-level panel discussion. Obviously, Citizen for making the whole show possible tonight. One of the leading watch brands for over 100 years now, and my team at WatchTime, obviously, for creating the framework. I would quickly switch to my, oh, I cannot share. Michael, thank
You
you.
can try it now, yeah.
I know, I've just realized. So, to make things a little bit easier for my introduction, because I see so many faces on the screen, I would really like to introduce and welcome Brent Durand. Brent is many things: a scuba diver, he's a surfer, he's a writer and photographer, and he has been diving for over 25 years. Welcome to the show, Brent. It's great having you. The one person today that is not allowed to share his location with us is Mike Coots. He is joining us tonight as a surfer, photographer, and which I think is absolutely incredible. He's also a shark attack survivor. Welcome, Mike. And last but definitely not least, we have Yovan Sanchez with us. Yovan comes from the Miami-Dade Fire Rescue Team, among other things, and has been living out his dream of working, living, and enjoying the ocean his whole life. Welcome, Yovan. What an amazing panel. So back to FaceTime. I think the best place to kick off the whole thing is to maybe share about what we have in common with our passion for the underwater world, for the ocean, for the sea. Can each of you tell us a little bit how you started diving, why you started, and just provide a little bit of background for your and about your passion for the underwater world? Who wants to start? Mike? And yes, obviously you're allowed to tell us where you are, but I'm still jealous, and you have to unmute yourself.
Yeah, good evening, Roger. I'm in the Maldives right now. I got here a few hours ago, and it's a little past 2 in the morning. But I think it's going to be a beautiful day tomorrow. I can see the stars out right now. But I grew up on the island of Kauai. It's the westernmost island in the state of Hawaii, and from a young age, I love the water. I think it was my grandmother at 3 years old pushing me into a wave for the first time that I fell in love with surfing. It might have been 4 or 5 years old when I put a mask on and looked underwater and saw the coral reef fish that I knew I wanted to spend a lot of time underwater diving. I don't know if it was our state fish, the humu humu nuku nuku apua'a, but there was something about the ocean and something about being around it that basically captured my interest since as long as I can remember.
I think it's scientifically proven that we're attracted by the ocean, by the movement of the waves. Brent, what about your passion, your background? And you too need to unmute yourself.
Sorry about that. Okay, so now I'm unmuted. But similar, I grew up near the ocean, and was always close to the ocean. Started surfing a whole lot. I got certified to scuba dive with my family when I was young, and ended up doing a lot more surfing than scuba diving or free diving for a number of years. And then slowly started my career after college and started working. And basically before work and after work, I was in the water. I was watching sunrise, sunset. I was surfing a lot. And then I started night diving. So getting into scuba diving at night after work, that's just the time to fit it in. And that just started growing. I started shooting photos, seascapes and landscapes all around the ocean. And then one day decided, hey, you know what? I love both of these things, scuba diving, but why pack the camera away on land? Let's start taking the camera in the ocean and in the water, and sort of the rest is history. So it's just a way to combine all the passions and hobbies into one thing.
Perfect. And Yovan?
Well, I'm here in my hometown, Miami, Florida. I started diving at swimming and snorkeling with my old man at a young age. We would do shore dives for spearfishing. And that grew into a passion. I started just studying books and getting the Jacques Cousteau encyclopedia, and like was obsessed with marine biology, and everything that I did revolved around the ocean. Going into high school, I got certified as a PADI open water diver in high school, and it snowballed into that. One thing led to another. Going into the fire department, we had a dive rescue team. I got involved with the dive rescue. I started working as a captain. I did commercial fishing as well. So basically, every moment that I could have, was in the water and in the ocean. Then shortly thereafter, in the fire department, our marine program started with our fireboats, and it was a natural fit for me. I fell into the marine program. I became a marine firefighter. I also started teaching with the fire department with navigation and hard hull boat maneuvering and everything else that we do within the fire service out of the Port of Miami. And now, even on my days off, like it's everything that I do with my family, raising my family the same way I was raised on the ocean, just spending every minute we can out there.
Beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing that with us. So apparently I'm the only one who is not in close proximity to an ocean or anything bigger than a river or a sea, but that's I think that's the fate when you live in Switzerland. At least we have the highest density in water, I think worldwide, but we're a tiny country. Mike, I've learned in the introduction, which is something a bit mind-blowing, that you actually are a shark attack survivor. Would you mind telling us a little about that? I know it's a sensitive topic, but that's definitely something that none of us probably have witnessed.
Yeah, I don't mind at all, Roger, and sharing. I absolutely fell in love with bodyboarding. It's like boogie boarding, and I had a lot of friends that were top level bodyboarders, and that's what I wanted to do for a living. I joined a surfing team, and we trained pretty much every single day, trying to find the best ways. We had a coach. We'd enter a lot of contests, and I graduated in the summer of '97. I was 18 years old at the time, and that summer we had a really lousy like summer surf season. The waves were really bad, and we saw a beautiful swell coming in late fall. This was like later in October, and we were like so excited to be in the water. And I remember going to bed that night just knowing finally I'm going to get some good surf. We woke up really early, got down to the beach, and to get to the beach, you got to drive a 4x4 vehicle. And we opened the car door as soon as we pulled up to the surf spot. And I smelled a really foul, stinky, dead fish smell, a smell unlike I've ever smelled before. And I should have probably taken that as a cue not to go out. But because we had such a bad run of waves, there was nothing really stopping us from getting in the water. And about 4 of my friends or so, we all ran out there, and they caught waves right off the bat. And I was in about 30 feet of water, so maybe 100 yards offshore. It's a surf spot that's a right-hand point break. It goes from a rocky reef into a sandbar, and I saw a beautiful wave coming, and there was a guy next to me that I hadn't surfed with before. And in surfing, you don't share waves, so I wanted to sort of make that first initial commitment, like this is my wave. And I remember my fingertips brushing the surface of the water, and as soon as I sort of made that initial motion from sitting there motionless for a minute or two, a large tiger shark came up from underneath me, grabbed onto both my legs, and started ragdolling me back and forth. And it was really visceral. I could remember looking at the shark. I felt an immense amount of pressure. I didn't feel any pain whatsoever. Yeah, it's crazy how there was no pain. It was just like if everybody in this entire room was sitting on me at one time. That's what it felt like. And I knew I was getting attacked by a shark. And I remember just sort of like this, almost like I was watching in a movie. Like it wasn't happening to me, but I did feel this creepy, like fight or flight sort of feeling. And I tried getting the shark away from me. I stuck my right hand in its mouth to try to get my legs out of its mouth, and that didn't work. And it started swaying back and forth, like this real slow motion out of the water, ragdoll type motion. And with my left hand, I punched it in the nose a couple times. And as soon as I hit it, I think it was the second or third strike to the nose, it let go. It went back underwater. I got back on my board. I looked at the guy that was next to me. He was as white as a ghost. I remember his eyes popping out of his head. I didn't know what to say. I yelled, "Shark, go in." And he just beelined to the beach, and I started paddling behind him. And as I sort of made that first paddle, I looked, and my right index finger was split open like a potato. I could see the bone. I saw a lot of blood, and I knew I was injured. And I was like, I better go in as fast as I can. And as I'm paddling, really like probably the fastest I've ever paddled on a board, my right leg started spasming. And when you're paddling, you're looking forward, you're in a prone position, you don't see what's behind you. And I thought it was the shark finishing me off, because I felt this uncontrollable shake in my right leg. And I looked over my shoulder expecting to see jaws attacking me. And it wasn't that, it was my leg perfectly severed off. like if you took a machete and cut it right off, the blood was squirting out the middle every time my heart beat. And then I was like, oh boy, I'm in big trouble now. And luckily a little wave came. I rode it right up to the sand. My teammate, Kyle, saw what was happening. He rushed to my aid. He dragged me up the beach a little bit, took my leash, made a tourniquet with it, said a prayer for me on that beach. And I remember feeling like I was going to die, but it wasn't a scary feeling. It was just sort of this surreal, I don't know, just whatever happens, happens. I opened my eyes and I was in the bed of a pickup truck, and we basically hauled butt to the emergency room. And I remember going in and out of shock, getting really hot, really cold, really hot, really cold, trying to rip off my wetsuit at one point. Just sort of the cycle, typical shock. And we pulled up to the ER, and the doctor ran right up to the bed of the truck, put his arm on my shoulder, and my body gave to, and I passed out. And I woke up the next day in our main hospital with my family around me, and it was a bit of a somber moment. I remember kind of like in this lucid state, opening my eyes, and my parents there and looking at the doctor, like, who's going to tell him? And my mom's like, you're missing your leg. And I was like, I know, I saw it come off. And they're like, whoa, we didn't know that you knew that you're missing your leg. And from then on, it was, he's alive. And I felt really fortunate to open my eyes and have my family there. I didn't think I was going to make it. And I wasn't ever like bummed at that shark. I was in the hospital for a week or so, and had a bit of time to think. And I was just the wrong place at the wrong time. And I truly felt happy to be alive. And since then, I feel like I'm living on borrowed time. If you were to ask me if I would paddle out that morning, knowing I would become limbless, I'd become an amputee, and what life would hold after that, absolutely. I mean, I'm here in the Maldives right now. It's 2 a.m. At 8 a.m., we're about to jump in the water, looking for tiger sharks to dive with, the same species that nearly killed me. It's crazy how life can do that to you. And I think that's the beauty of life.
An amazing, incredible story. Thank you so much for sharing that.
Yeah.
Yovan, you probably were already thinking the whole protocol of being in the life-saving industry.
I was more pissed at the guy that swam in without trying to help him. I'm like, what's wrong with that guy? It's unlike my nature. I'm like the first one to jump in and try to help. So, that just boils my blood when I hear people, like, I guess because I have I'm wired differently, I guess. But yes, oh man, what a story.
And I mean, definitely not a competition, but is there something similar you that happened to you, that you experienced, that had such an impact on how you looked at diving and the underwater world? Because that's what I really admire with Mike's case, is that, again, he's going to dive with tiger sharks tomorrow, and that's incredible as someone who bounces back from something like that. So curious to hear stories from Brent and Yovan, if there happened anything to you while diving or going on a dive that is worthwhile sharing too.
Well, absolutely. I've spent a lifetime spearfishing, so I guess to a certain point, once you start being around sharks, there's a level of complacency that happens. I have had very close calls, nothing to the extent of what happened with Mike. But I have had bull sharks come aggressively, and like I do a lot of blue water spearfishing, and blue water spearfishing is basically floating in more than 100 feet of water, where you're diving down repetitive dives to shoot these bigger fish. We shoot wahoo and mahi and kingfish, and a lot of times we'll shoot a fish and we'll shoot up to 8 fish in a day, and we won't land one because the sharks come in and just start eating our fish. And what you pull up is just the end of your line. They eat their spear and everything. And we have run into sharks as well as when running into our dive emergencies. We're out there, we're doing search and rescue at night with boat collisions, and there's a lot of blood in the water. It's just a mess. It's there's nothing nice about being on scene where there's people that are missing family members, and there's like injuries, and you're in the water and it's cold and it's dark and it's murky and you don't know what's up there. And yes, we have had run-in with sharks, but it's honestly not our concern. Our focus is mostly finding those victims and trying to get them back to safety.
Yep, and get certified and be careful. That's
absolutely
something that we cannot repeat enough. Brent.
I just don't have anything that compares. Those are,
which is good.
I just can't imagine that. And just, keeping such a positive mindset, certainly an inspiration. my stories have to do with little fish biting me that are this big. So it's a whole different category there, but nothing similar. Yeah.
And you've mentioned before that your passion for underwater photography, and I happen to know how much equipment there is involved with underwater photography, especially when the fish are getting smaller. So
yes,
for you, what's I mean, obviously it's the air tank and everything else, but what is the most quintessential piece of equipment that you carry with you when you go diving?
Yeah, the most important piece is based on basic function. So it's a dive mask. If you don't have the mask, you can't see. Beyond that, you can get into, are you free diving? Are you scuba diving? So you may not need a tank, a regulator, or anything else like that. But the one important piece is a watch or something to tell time. Even before the new dive computers that calculate all the algorithms and decompression for you, you used to dive very fixed tables that the Navy helped create. And then you would calculate those tables based on depth and time. So basically being able to tell the time and have some sort of watch or timekeeping device would be like, number two behind a mask, I think, just because, that is critical. And if your big dive computer stops working or malfunctions, you can still dive off of those tables just by knowing, depths and times and managing your time. So.
Same question to you, Yovan. What is the quintessential piece of equipment? I mean, you already mentioned spearfishing, so I would assume that there is something involved with that.
Yeah. Our biggest fear, I mean, obviously with diving within your limits and knowing and keeping time is mostly entanglements. When it comes down to a rescue call, for example, a boat collision or a capsized vessel where there's possible victims under a vessel. One of our main hazards that we have is there's fishing lines and dock lines and cast nets and all kinds of entanglement hazards hanging from that vessel because it's upside down and floating in the water. And those lines are just kind of wrapping around everything as you're doing a search. If I'm going into a boat and I'm searching for a victim, I've had entanglements where I always have a knife. And one key tool that I have been using lately, which has been working, it is the Lifeline Jaws safety tool. So this tool right here has been really worked really well for us lately. So what it does have a cutting edge on one side where I could reach behind my tank and try to catch whatever's wrapping me up. And then it also has a line cutter on the one side. So as far as having a good cutting tool, ever since I started diving, I've always had a knife with me, especially during like spearfishing when you have the line that's attached to the fish that's swimming erratically around you and it's wrapping around your fins and wrapping. I actually had a very close call where a fish wrapped the line around my neck and there's a buoy on one end and the line is wrapped to the fish and it dragged me and the buoy down like 40, 50 feet. And I was reaching for my knife and trying to find my knife and I had a handle on it. And one of my buddies swam down, grabbed the line from behind my neck, and I felt it just come up right at the last second. And I'm looking up at the surface. I'm like, okay, I can make it. And we made it up to the surface and, taking that first breath of air, I was like, I'm happy I had my knife, but it was just one of those reassuring moments where I said, okay, from this point on, I know I have to have a cutting tool because, you think, oh, it's not going to happen to me, but having a good quality tool does make a difference. Yep. And one of the things that I did find with that Lifeline Jaws is that during one of our filming events that we were doing to film for our products, we were actually coming up from a dive, and our dive rope that hangs off the back of the boat in order for our divers to hang on and get their gear ready and move back to the boat. The seas were so rough that the line had gone under the boat and wrapped under the propeller. And now we're offshore. It's 6 to 8 foot seas. We can't get that the propeller untangled. It's wrapped around there, and with the current and the waves, it just kept wrapping and wrapping. And I went to go attempt to get the rope off, but now this propeller is going up and down 6 feet every time a wave comes. And mind you, we're wearing all this bulky scuba equipment, and we're trying to get in there. So I had to put my hand on the rudder and with one hand try to make quick work of all the rope that's in there. And I was able to just quickly and effectively cut the rope away from that propeller and get in and out safely rather than having to sit there and cut with a regular knife. I was able to hook the rope and cut, and it just made quick work of it. And doing so, I was able to not be under the propeller longer and risk being hurt on any other wave coming through. So the less time I was there, the safer it was for me to do so. And so that being said, a dive knife is, I feel is one of a very important piece of equipment that you should have with you at all times.
Yep. But as you pointed correctly, the JAWS tool is just much safer than a dive knife, because again, what you said with movement, with a pointy end of a knife, there is also some danger to it. Mike,
Exactly.
there any equipment, any tools that you would dare going into the water?
Yeah, I'd have to agree with Yovan. A knife that can cut lines, can cut rope. I had an experience about 2 years ago that to me was much more traumatic than the shark attack. I took my jet ski to fish an outer reef, and I had done it a bunch of times. And at the end of the surf session, it came time to pull up the anchor, and the chain had wrapped around the bottom of the ocean. And I did a couple dives. I didn't have a mask on. I didn't have fins on or anything. And I tried to get the chain off the reef, and my jet ski the main line was pulling really tight with the trade winds. And my third dive down, I pulled the main line to put some slack off of it so I could get the chain off the reef, and I couldn't get it. And I was completely out of breath, and I pushed off the seafloor to get a breath of air. And that main line, that slack, had wrapped around my prosthetic leg and double knotted and cinched tight as soon as I let go of the main line, and it pulled tight with the wind. And I basically had hung myself on the seafloor. I had no knife, I had nothing. And I remember thinking, this is the dumbest way to die. I totally panicked. I was completely out of breath, and I started convulsing underwater, going like this crazy motion. And then I have a lapse of time from then till I was hanging onto my jet ski, dry heaving, and I don't remember any of it. And for about a week, I had PTSD really bad. I would break out crying, and it wasn't until I bought a knife that could cut line that I really felt like I had done something plausible to prevent this from ever happening again. And I told myself, anytime I'm near any bit of lines in the ocean, that I'm going to have a knife that I can cut those lines with within arm's reach without fail.
And I'm now scared to ask you any other question. I don't know what you're going to be answering, but that's just it's more dramatic every time. You mentioned before that we living on borrowed time, and that's a beautiful segue to, I mean, obviously we are in the wake of having seen another launch of a Citizen Aqualand dive watch. What does time underwater mean for you guys, especially when you go diving? Brent, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. One of the things I do with California shore diving, and especially here in Northern California, is everything is very condition dependent. So, with regards to time, I'm looking at the swell forecast and wind way in advance, a week out from when I want to go diving, and start planning that. And then starting to look at things like the tide, because the tide has a big influence on different dive sites. So for me, like, the time starts when I'm just planning the dive all the way to executing the dive, right? We're in the water and trying to keep track of where I am, how long in the dive it's been. A lot of these places, there's not a lot of good navigation. So all of my navigation in a terrain that looks and feels kind of the same is based on compass and time. So if I estimate, time out or this many kicks out in a certain direction, I can estimate, the time back to that point, and I can do angles and kind of dive around points and different features just through time and compass heading, which, is really essential to save yourself from long surface swims or, just being too far out in the water. So, that's, I guess, the fundamentals of how I plan and how I dive. Each dive really depend on time. So, it's kind of the basic building block.
And Mike.
Yep. Yeah.
Time underwater.
Time being underwater. It's a funny thing because you go underwater to sort of forget about time. It's a time warp. It's one of those things where you just sort of, you don't want to be at a certain place at a certain time. You're just kind of such in the moment. But then on the other hand, you must know how long you've been underwater. It's imperative. The safety of how long you've been underwater, whether it's in regards to decompression, sickness, et cetera, your life depends on it. You need to have something that accurately tells you how long you've been underwater. So it's something you want to forget about, but then when you need it, you want it to be accurate and know that it's working. And that's really, really important being underwater.
And Yovan.
Well, in my line of work, when someone is either missing underwater, it's when seconds count. And a lot of times we're trying to make the most of those, those minutes that we have underwater to try to find those victims. Time management is huge as far as when we're looking for victims, and also whether we're going to come up from a dive or not. Just like Mike and Brett said, that you need to know those dive tables and need to know what your limitations are so that you don't become a victim yourself.
Yep. And I think that's something also a takeaway for everyone listening in. I think if you're underwater, you have ultimately a very limited amount of time that you can spend in this beautiful environment. And that's something that we tend to quite often forget. I was fortunate enough that while diving, occasionally having been equipped with watches from Citizen, one of my personal favorite diving tools that I have. And you probably won't believe this, but this watch is 16 years old now, and this is how it looks like. It just shot these pictures 10 days ago. So let's talk about Duratec Titanium. It really holds up. I never dive without a watch because I also happen to be a watch guy, and this is one of my favorite pieces for when actually going down in the Mediterranean or wherever I can actually go diving. So, and that brings me to our host of tonight, Citizen. Have any of you actually taken a Citizen watch with you while diving? And for me, it was the Autozilla. Unfortunately, the current Aqualand, we're still experiencing a pandemic here, so diving is a bit more difficult. Plus, Lake Zurich is extremely cold. So once again, I'm a bit jealous of the gentleman being in the Maldives right now. So that didn't work out, but I hope I can do that anytime soon. Yovan, starting with you. Citizens on the water.
So when I got certified in 1997 as a scuba diver, I had been doing free diving, and as far as depth gauges, they were big and clunky and everything. And then around 1999, I bought my first Citizen watch, which I actually have it right here. I dove with this watch and did several rescue missions on with this watch for about 10 years straight before I moved on to my second Citizen watch, which I actually had a little incident where I lost part of the band and then I replaced it. But that being said, having the depth gauge on the watch, in the event that I didn't have one on my regulator or it failed, during an emergency call, I knew that I always had that depth gauge ready at a glance on my Citizen watch, and also having the dependability of being able to keep time and monitor my dives and not have to worry about charging the battery, knowing that it was charged by the sunlight. I wore that watch till all the numbers and the dive tables and everything all wore off. I mean, the glass on this watch is just, it is beat and worn, but you know what? I feel that it gives it a certain characteristic and sentimental value. And this watch is going to be with me forever because I have so many stories just with this watch alone, you know. And it also was more for bragging rights. Once we were doing free diving and we were in our crazy days and seeing who could dive the deepest, no one would really believe, oh, you didn't dive to 100 feet or 115 feet. And I was like, well, it's right here on my watch. You could see it right there. So it was kind of for bragging rights too. So, you know, I always had the watch with me because I would never let an opportunity pass by to brag on one of my friends, you know. So
Yep, totally get that. Mike.
Yep.
I see that you were wearing the right watch.
Yep, so. Yep. And I'll be using it all day tomorrow. I love my watch, and what I really love about it is that you don't have to change the battery. It's powered by light, and I won't lie. When I'm at home on Kauai, I do a lot of surfing. I surf, and when I do diving, I usually go on trips. And before each trip, before I had this watch, I would have to go and get my battery changed pretty much every time before a trip, because I mean, your life depends on your watch. And we have one dive shop on the island, and it's literally with traffic, half a day to go there and go back. I didn't trust myself changing the battery myself, opening up the watch, doing that all myself. I'd rather have that one less thing to think about. And with this watch, I don't have to worry. And to me, that's one less thing to worry about when you're packing for a dive trip. And when you get to the dive site, that's huge.
And light is everywhere around us. Brent.
Yep.
Light is around us. Yeah, you know, I've always been a fan of having watches. So I've actually got my Eco Drive here, in addition to the new Aqualand. But one of the things that I find really interesting with having a watch on me and diving with it, it comes to photo workshops. So I've done a number of different photography workshops, in countries all over the world, so in the Indo-Pacific, and you're dealing with guests and with students. So what, we're in the dive boats, we're out of the dive boats. Without fail, I'll be asked questions, literally, what time is it? Or what time is our next session? Or what time's our next meeting? So if I don't have a watch on me, or I rely on my dive computer that's attached to my dive gear, I'm going to end up without a watch. So, or without being able to answer those questions. So like, I've just found always having time on me in the world of cell phones is just really useful in these situations where you're running around hectic, working with a lot of people. And to Yovan's point with the Aqualand and having depth on your watch is really good too. With diving and stuff like rock climbing, just a lot of different activities, redundancy is really, really important. So, whether you're diving with a buddy or you're diving solo, scuba diving, whatever that might be, having a backup way to tell depth and time is critical, because you just, that redundancy is important if you do get into a situation where, a piece of gear does fail. So,
yeah. We have just gotten a question regarding battery lifetime and underwater pressure. And the short answer is a battery is not impacted by the pressure that you're experiencing while on a dive. Technically, there is, from depth maybe 3,000 meters below the surface, which you hopefully will never go, the quartz crystals might get crushed. But battery lifetime and pressure is not really an issue, but cold quite often can be an issue. But that's a slightly different topic. Sorry. So, speaking of watches, Citizen has released the latest version of the Aqualand. We have 3 with us tonight. Yovan, what are you wearing? Are you wearing one too? So we have 4 with us tonight. Perfect. And I have a couple of others here. And as it's always difficult with these Zoom meetings, is how to best present a watch. And this time, allow me to dive back in a little bit of the time and the history of the Aqualand, which was officially released in '85. And it really has become an icon just purely out of the design that we're seeing here. The world's first diver's watch with an electronic depth sensor, which by the end of the day is probably the most convenient combination that you need for going on a dive. You need time and you need depth, and that will result ultimately in your dive profile. Obviously, how much air is still in your tank is equally important, but time and depth are quintessential information when you go on a dive. The watch was released in '86, has become an icon, and looking back further, because you can just do a timeline. There were so many innovations in Citizen's history, like 1976 EcoDrive, which is something that really has helped us in no longer having to change batteries. Again, something that we heard tonight. It's impossible if you're on a remote island. Don't try to find an O-ring. Don't find spare batteries. It just doesn't work that way. The name Promaster first introduced in '89, and since then we have seen many Aqualands, and they all have become iconic. They all have become some of the most trusted and some of the most desirable pieces when going on a dive. The latest piece, I was fortunate enough to already have spent a couple of weeks with it. And it's so much easier to shoot these watches above the surface. And that's something that we're going to be talking about a bit later when it comes to underwater photography. I was so fortunate to not having to experience an underwater shooting with that, but I will do that as soon as possible. So this is the latest version. There are 3 pieces, a black red one, a black green one, and the one that you've seen on my wrist and everyone else's wrist, which is a special edition limited to 1,000 pieces. And that actually comes with the JAWS tool that we have mentioned before. Again, some impressions. I was really impressed by having screw-in pushers for the chronograph function, which is something that I did not expect. I totally fell in love with the JAWS tool, which is something that I have not seen before, especially actually doing a loom shot with the JAWS tool, which I did not know before, and I'll jump right to it. It is actually the most luminous piece of equipment I have ever seen. So the whole thing is actually luminous by night. The watch itself simultaneously displays current time as well as the current dive depth, which is, again, what I said, very convenient and very important. It also displays the maximum dive depth up to 50 meters. The sensor detects immediately when the watch goes into the water, which is really convenient. And it engages underwater. The depth gauge hand automatically shows the current depth. So wherever you are, unfortunately, that's something that's not working above the surface, but once you're in the water, the watch knows you're in the water and you're being displayed your current depth. You have a dial ring, which is indicating your current depth. And the moment you're up, the hand goes back to 0. Voila. This is what we're having tonight. An amazing piece. I'm fortunate to already have spent a lot of time with it. And as mentioned before, the one thing that I wanted to do would have been an underwater shooting with the watch. Again, the lakes are too cold here, and even the swimming pools are closed due to the pandemic. So I couldn't even cheat and go into a warm water pool and try to do something like that. So that didn't work. I'll do that at a later time. But speaking about underwater photography, I know everyone who is into photography, if you think photography is on a scale from 1 to 10, maybe on a 5, underwater photography is on a 15. But please tell us more about underwater photography. How did you start? We have 2 photographers with us tonight. How did that passion start? And let's just jump into that. Brent, do you want to start?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Roger. Yeah, I mentioned it briefly in the intro, but basically early on in my work career, so right after college, I was shooting a lot of landscapes at sunset and driving up to Malibu, California. I was living in Los Angeles at the time. So I would be shooting these gorgeous seascapes and just out there and watching the sunset. And then I would pack my camera away and then I'd go do my night dive and, be exploring all these different reefs in Malibu, whether it was by myself or with dive buddies, but just spending a lot of time underwater. And then finally just started deciding, you know what, why should I pack the camera away? Let's take the camera underwater and just start learning. So I borrowed a camera from my brother, and then I ended up, loving it. I started piecing together just a small, modest camera system off of eBay and just started practicing with that, just spending hours and hours out there at night and, shooting photos and trying to be creative, but then also trying to be methodical too and working through the settings. What do these settings do? How can I, work through incremental changes in lighting, and how will that affect my photographs? So I started doing a lot of that. I started trading some marketing consulting for camera gear. And long story short, that led me into a career the last 8-9 years, in the underwater photography and diving industries. So I've tried to stay really close to that, while at the same time, practicing more, shooting a lot more, to the point today where I'm in Northern California. And, I love the adventure of diving, but also the adventure of shooting some of these reefs that, have seen very seldom seen photographers. Certainly others have been there, but, they're not the images we see every day in the underwater photo world. So to me, that's exciting. And to keep pushing my personal limits and just shooting stuff that, I feel is unique and challenging as a diver and uses all those skills is a lot of fun. So that's kind of the direction I've taken it.
And Mike, you tell us.
Thanks. Thanks, Roger. And that was great stuff, Brent. I studied portraiture 4 years at art school, shooting people, and loved shooting people, and sort of wanted to learn everything about what makes a good, people photograph. And it was towards the end of that 4 years that I became aware of shark conservation, of what's happening with shark fin soup. It was watching a documentary called Shark Water. I was absolutely blown away. I knew a lot about what sharks were doing to us, like hence my leg, but had no idea about what we were doing to sharks. And it was after watching this film that I really became involved in the world of shark conservation and talking to lawmakers about creating policy changes for sharks. And at the time, I was still doing a lot of photography, but not taking my camera underwater. I got invited to some incredible dive sites, diving with sharks and hanging with marine biologists. And one day I was like, I'm going to take my camera underwater. And I had my portraiture gear. like a 50mm lens, a 70-200, stuff that you typically wouldn't take underwater to shoot fish or shoot sharks with, and came back up to the top of the surface and put it on my laptop and loved what I shot. And I was like, wow, this is pretty cool. And it kind of like, I've really enjoyed since then using those skills that I learned to shoot people, those lenses, whether it's focusing on the eyes like you would a human, the composition, you know, with leading lines and things like that, or when you're editing the photos, finding that those humanistic characters like a smirk or a smile or a catch light in the eye, something that you can really relate to. And those traits are the same things when you look at a photograph of a person. Those are the same attributes that you feel connection to. And I found that to be really powerful. And this was a time when social media was coming to light, and I started sharing these images on Facebook, on Instagram, and people loved them. And I was able to tell a story, and I think maybe try to help change the perception that Hollywood has sort of sold us on sharks. They're these mind-eating killers that are basically just want to devour everything in sight, and that there's much more beauty behind a set of jaws, that there's a lot of brains behind the brawn. And I found that to be really fun, and it's challenging to me. A great white shark is the ultimate subject. It's the ultimate muse. It's challenging to shoot, technically difficult, fast, unpredictable, but it's also really exciting, and it's really beautiful. And I think sometimes I'm the luckiest photographer in the world to have such beautiful subjects.
And boy, can you spend a lot of money on underwater camera equipment. So if you're into gear, that's a never-ending story. But the good news is, for everyone who wants actually to look into underwater photography, there are also some let's say less expensive options. Starting with the iPhone, there are some really amazing underwater cases for the iPhone, and that's a great way to start. But someone is much more knowledgeable than I am, Mike. No, Brent, what I was told during the pre-briefing of tonight's session is that you also do teach people how to photograph underwater. Mm-hmm. So what are your 3 most important rules when it comes to taking pictures underwater?
Yeah, absolutely. So I do a lot of photo instruction through my website online, and then workshops, at scuba diving resorts all over the place. So in terms of tips, I'm trying to go a little different, but this starts from the big picture. So I think the first tip is to master your diving. So, if you're a free diver, you want to master, that ability to smoothly and sleekly get underwater and to be comfortable underwater. If you're a scuba diver, you really want to have good buoyancy, because you want those things to be second nature, so you can be comfortable and safe. Because at that point, then you can actually start focusing on some of the aspects of your photography, which is the second tip, I think, which is basic composition. So I'm a big advocate, like you were talking about, entry level, camera gear and photography, but you can create fantastic photos with, any type of camera. So as Mike said before, eye contact and things like that, are really what creates captivating images. So you can do that through composition and through engaging with the subjects. With any camera, just to create a good photo. So that's composition. And I think the third thing would be that you want to be deceptively close to your subject underwater. And this is for big subjects, whether it's a shipwreck.
Depending on the subject, there are some subjects you want to be as far away as possible.
Fair enough. Yes. Anything that's dangerous, you keep that distance, right? Safety first. But, basically for wide angle photos underwater, we shoot with very wide lenses so that you can get close, but also still see the full subject if it's really large, like that shipwreck. Or when you're shooting a macro photo, you want to be very close and you want to fill the frame with the subject. So you want to make sure the subject occupies the whole frame, the whole screen that you're seeing on the back of that camera LCD or through the viewfinder. Because if it's just a pinpoint in a sea of algae or something, it's just not going to be a captivating photo. So if you get close and really fill the frame with that subject, it's going to create a captivating image.
No, yep. I've been there, and every time I try to show these photographies to my friends, is look there behind that small little dot. That's what I've seen. No, but
yeah.
I think Minda is already looking at me. It's time for one of the first questions for our quiz, and paying attention would be. I mean, you've seen the first Aqualand was launched in '85/86. And obviously, that was not a typical EcoDrive watch as we've seen today. So how many batteries would have powered that watch from '85? And now that will be your time to work with the chat function and let us know and hopefully win some swag from Citizen. Yovan.
Roger, we actually already have a winner, so that was really quick. They're very engaged. So good job, guys. I'll announce that in just a minute. So can you move on to the second trivia, please? We've got a knowledgeable audience today.
Never underestimate your audience. So that's the takeaway from here. Well, but again, I mentioned PADI in the beginning. Guess how many members does PADI currently have, which is a good indication on how many people actually are passionate about diving. But being passionate is my segue that I've been waiting for Yovan, because on a different note, you've touched the subject of rescuing people, helping people. Has been a passion for you pretty much from the very first beginning. Am I right, Yovan?
It is. It's very passionate, and it feels like all the events in my life have put me at this moment now in time. So being that I grew up familiarizing myself with the water and being comfortable in the water and all the free diving that I did and all the boat navigation that I learned growing up with my dad, everything led me to this point where I got to use all those skills that I learned up to this point to make a difference in somebody's life. So like I said, when the seconds count and I'm out there looking for somebody's wife, somebody's brother, somebody's son, that's where I really get passionate about the work that I do. So where that passion comes from, it comes from my relationship with my family, with my kids. As you can tell, I'm very emotional about it now, just because it really hits hard with me, you know?
Yeah.
So where my passion comes from, it's my family.
Wow. And I mean, we have asked Brent for tips and tricks when it comes to photography, and I think I also owe it to you. Is there like something that people are always underestimating that I mean, I'm sure everyone wants to meet you at some point, but maybe not in a professional environment. So is there something that you have witnessed in your career that people are quite often underestimating when they're out on the ocean, when they're going on a dive, something that could easily have been prevented? Or not? Yovan?
Yes, I'm sorry.
Sorry, now I wasn't sure if I was muted. Is there a takeaway from you for the audience, like something that quite often you witness during your work, accidents that could have easily prevented, like really like one of the takeaways where you think if people would have thought about that, this did not happen? Is there something like an easy recipe for people to follow?
Absolutely. Just like when you plan for diving, like, you know, you plan your dive and you dive your plan. The same thing goes into whenever you're doing anything in the ocean. You want to have a float plan. Just you want to let family members know where you're going. You want to let people know when you're due to be back. Just like sticking to the plan and having different phone numbers and who to contact and do that. I feel that if everyone has a plan in place before they go out, just like if you're planning a dive and to know how deep you're going to be and how much time you could be down there, that helps not only get you back safely, but if you do get into an emergency situation or something with that that you need to get yourself out of, there's already a plan in place for us to go out and have some information to know where to look, you know. I feel that that's a really good tip, is just to not only go out and do things on your own, but at least let other people know what you're doing.
Yeah. That's a actually really valid point. Minda, am I allowed to have one more question before we go to?
Yes, I just put in the chat. We still don't have a correct answer to the second question.
Thank God.
But I would still like you to move on to the third question, please.
Good.
Not to tell you what to do, please.
No, that's good. That's why we work together the way we do. When did Citizen launch EcoDrive? Because it's been such an important milestone, not just in the history of Citizen, but also in the history of sustainability. if you just look at how many batteries have been replaced by this technology, especially now that the watch industry has discovered sustainability as a topic. This has been going on at Citizen for quite some time, so that's really something.
Well, we already have a winner. So good job, David Buckley. Well done. We have a lot of winners, but we're just going strictly by who enters it first. I know a lot of people guessed that. So David Buckley, you're the winner.
Good. We also had a huge number of people reaching out to us before the event and sending in questions, and obviously going through these questions would have required another 2 hours to with a panel like that really is amazing. But I think one of the questions that quite often stood out was everyone's favorite diving region and why. And Brent, do you want to start with that one?
That's a really hard question and a common one. So I love an area very close to home, which is the Channel Islands in California. I think when you dive those kelp forests on a great day with blue water and good visibility, there's nothing better. So, I could dive there every day. So the Channel Islands in California. Yep.
Good. Mike?
I enjoyed Socorro Island in Mexico, and I have a feeling tomorrow's dive might change that. Just from what it looked like flying in here, the water clarity, I've never seen anything like it. So I'm pretty excited for tomorrow. So ask me that question tomorrow, I might have a different answer.
Good. Yovan?
It would definitely be a good tie between the Florida Keys and the Bahamas. The Bahamas is probably my top places to dive. The clarity of the water and being able to dive in places that are very, very hard to get to and that not many people have probably dived is it's fascinating for me to be like, there hasn't been somebody diving here in probably 20 years or ever, and seeing those places are really nice.
I couldn't agree more. I've been fortunate enough to also have been once on the Bahamas, and I couldn't agree more. I also picked one question for me because I'm selfish and I also have to work. And that was, what should a first-time dive watch buyer know and what should they look for? And I think that's quite easy to answer. And that actually applies to pretty much every single watch that someone is buying. And it really comes down to know what you're looking for. It's the same with cars. If you're looking for a fast car, then please don't complain about it being a little bit less comfortable than a bigger car. And the same goes with dive watches. Some of you guys will look into something that is a much more affordable, because when diving, there is always a risk of something happening. And even with the greatest straps, with the best materials, there's always a certain risk. And the risk can be you, but just not paying attention to something. So know what you're looking for. If it's a perpetual calendar for a couple of $1,000s, if that's what you get going, then this is the answer. If you're looking for something more affordable, more rocked, more like the traditional beater roll, then you have to look into something different. But what usually works really nice is the rubber strap is quite often the best solution. And everyone who has been diving, I cannot stress how important this little piece is that is usually included with Citizen watches, because once you have a wetsuit on and the colder the water gets, the bigger the wetsuit becomes, you need something like that. And what has never worked for me is the traditional dive clasp expansion. That just doesn't work, because you have a metal bracelet, you have a dive suit that is being compressed so everything gets loose, and usually a rubber strap is a much better option than that. On this note, I'm looking on my watch. Minda, this is Swiss punctuality, isn't it?
Yes, well done. So if anyone has questions for the panelists, can you please raise your hand, either virtually or otherwise, or write it in the chat, and I will unmute you. I know that we had a lot of questions come up in the chat about watches specifically that we may not have gotten to.
Well, it's 59, so.
And we did have a correct answer from the trivia. It was Matthew who correctly guessed 128,000 PADI members. So well done. We'll
That
be
is
sending you
impressive.
your citizen swag bag. Steve, did you have a question? I'm going to unmute you now.
How many
Yes.
people here are actually pad-eye divers or certified divers? And also along those lines, how many learned diving in the military like I did?
Quite a few hands raised. You can write it in the chat too. Oh yeah, a lot.
Very cool.
Very cool.
Anyone else have any questions for any of our panelists or Roger? Okay.
Good. Then it's up to me once more. First of all, thank you, Yovan, Mike, Brent. First of all, for sharing your time with us, but also for sharing your experiences and your memory with us, which quite often were more than emotional. So thank you so much for sharing that, for being here with us tonight, today, or in some cases even tomorrow because of the time difference. So thank you for that. And on behalf of WatchTime and Citizen, thanks everyone for attending tonight. It has been a huge pleasure for me, but also bittersweet realizing that I'm not able to go on a dive right now. So that really hurts, but everything else, thanks everyone. Stay safe, stay healthy, and take care, especially on the water. Enjoy tomorrow's dive. Say hi to the tiger sharks and everyone stay safe. Thanks everyone.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.
Bye.
Bye, everyone.